Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Lisa Sanchez, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is a real pleasure. You're joining us from California. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. Today, we're going to be talking about employee experience and what leaders can do to have a positive impact on that. Of course, leaders are going to impact employee experience one way or the other. And, ideally, it's in a positive way, not in a negative way. We want everyone to have a fantastic experience. We've all been there. We've all worked with bosses who are kind of either incompetent or jerk bosses or things like that. And that really negatively impacts folks in the workplace. But the opposite is also true. When you work with a really great leader, it can make all the difference in the world. And there are some pretty simple, consistent things leaders can do to really dramatically improve that employee experience. So we're going to unpack that and explore that together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Lisa's bio with everybody. Lisa M. Sanchez is an author, life coach, and the vice president for employee experience and engagement at ArtCenter College of Design in Pasadena, California. She leads a team dedicated to enriching the experiences and engagement for faculty and staff. Critical to this work is her direct work with Abide, or Access, Belonging, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity, and organizational culture. Born and raised in LA, Sanchez received her bachelor's degree in communication studies from California State University, Northridge, a master's degree in organizational management from the University of Phoenix, and is a certified professional life coach. I could go on, so many really cool things about you and your background, but before we continue with the conversation, anything you would like to highlight for the audience?
I'm ready to get into the conversation. I bring 30 years in this space of human resources. I put that in air quotes because it has transitioned over time.
Sure.
And now more than ever, the employee experience is elevated.
It is. The employee experience is absolutely elevated. And let's start there. Anyone who's in the audience today surely has heard the term employee experience, unless you're a complete, new person to this arena. It really does drive so much of the conversation these days. But I also find that different organizations, different leaders often think about employee experience quite differently. So for you and for your organization, what do you mean by employee experience?
Absolutely. So we know that this field of human resources has transitioned over time, right? Back in the olden days, we called it personnel. And then over time, it has transitioned to people and culture because HR practitioners have a pivotal role, not only in culture, but the people experience, right? And so, what I want folks to recognize right away is that COVID created a whole new employee.
Yeah.
The values are different, family became much more cherished and important, work life integration, as I like to call it, versus work life balance. It's integrating that into the employee experience because when I started in this field of HR 30 years ago, we used to say, leave your problems at the door.
Right.
And I want to just wash my mouth out with soap for every time I said that, right?
Well, I mean, it's still a super common saying and
It
mindset. Like
is.
lots of people still hold on to that. So,
And it makes me cringe. And
mm,
so the employee experience is recognizing that people do bring their lived experiences to work. Now, that's not to say we should be inundated with being psychologists and so forth. What it does mean is that we have to understand that how they live outside of work makes its way into the work environment, and that impacts their productivity, their engagement, how they communicate and interact. And so coming out of COVID, we moved into this hybrid environment. Why? Because childcare was impacted. People were taking care of their elderly parents at home while trying to work. They've got the kid at the table doing homework, and
yep.
those experiences still exist. And so when we talk about how leaders can effectively impact that, we have to be uber good listeners. We have to understand employee concerns. But at the same time, we've got a business to run, right?
Mhm.
And so while we're understanding that employees bring their lived experience to work, we still have to make sure that employees are connected to mission, vision, and values. So that's making sure that we get their input, that there's transparency in decision making, that we set clear expectations, for example. The other thing that came out of COVID is that people want to make sure that the work that they're doing is meaningful, that it is connected to their values. People want to feel like they get recognition for a job well done and that there's growth in the organization. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we increase our communication, that we increase collaboration, and that we're bringing people to the table for real input about what's happening in the organization. And that's how I think leaders can make an impact there.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the COVID pandemic and everything associated with that really created a context where people could challenge some longstanding assumptions about the workplace, about work, how work was designed. Certainly the whole butts and seats, mentality that
Yes,
has been so pervasive throughout business culture for such a long time and amongst many leaders. That was directly challenged, and organizations were forced, right, to
yes,
allow people to work remotely, unless you were, in certain occupations, and then people realized very quickly that, hey, not only does the butts and seats model not make sense in many cases, but it can negatively impact folks. When you're talking about the desired flexibility that people have, and so people,
absolutely.
even people who were resistant to working remotely, during COVID, they realized, hey, this is actually the flexibility is really nice. Hey, I really enjoy not having to commute a couple hours every day. I really
Absolutely.
enjoy, autonomy and flexibility and all those sorts of things. And it's interesting now because now many executives are doing return to office mandates and requiring folks to be in office at least part of the time. And, in many cases, it's a hybrid model. And, trying to balance between flexibility, autonomy, but also making sure that, they're maintaining the values alignment, the culture development opportunities, and those sorts of things. And so a lot shifted in the past 5 years, and we're still navigating it. And layer on top of
So,
that, on top of that, you have ongoing disruption via, advanced technologies, AI, machine learning, and such. That's shifting the way work is done, the way work is designed. Layer on top of that, kind of, at least in the US, it's this way in many parts of the world. We're in a really divisive kind of social political environment right now. So you work, with ABIDE, access, belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equity, which is one way to frame it. People
yes,
often say DEI or DEIB or whatever terminology you're using. I think it's fair to say that has largely been politically under attack, especially in recent years, which also is changing the landscape of what it looks like to focus on employee experience, especially for those who aren't, straight cisgender white guys like me, right? Like
yes,
anyone who
yes.
falls into a um, you know, different identity group may feel, challenged right now, may not feel safe, may not feel seen or heard or valued in the way that maybe they were starting to feel, in the wake of the George Floyd murder and other
Yes.
happenings in 2020, when organizations seem to start to lean in more towards inclusion and belonging, right? And
No, it
now it seems like
became,
they're
yeah,
backpedaling, right?
absolutely. It became almost a window curtain approach after George
Yeah.
Floyd, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, people were hiring chief diversity officers with no real goal behind that position. It often lacked budgets and staff,
Yeah.
a clear direction. Policy statements were being issued. We were getting all these emails, whether it was where you shop or where you bank. Suddenly you were getting emails about the CEO's position on DEI. And Now we see what's happening under this current administration where there's this dial back and organizations are paying a heavy price for that. And I'm not going to mention, the major retailer, but I think you know who I'm talking about, that there was a real backlash and pushback from the community, from the people who took issue with dialing back. And here's what I think happens or has happened with DEI. When you think of DEI, as you know, I like to call it abide because I think access and belonging needs to be included. And so I just shuffle all of those letters and call it abide. But what happens is when you treat them as programs or an initiative, it takes away the importance. And I think it's time that we reframe our language. These should be organizational values. These values really shape how employees experience work, their growth, their sense of belonging.
You know,
And honestly, everybody benefits from DEI or BI. You just think about how one accesses a building. I mean, we may not consciously think this is DEI or BI, but it is. Lactation spaces, holidays, floating holidays, using gender neutral restrooms or gender neutral language. All of those are important. Adapting your health benefits that you provide to your employees to not just focus on the traditional family, but the modern family. Families look different today. And I just don't understand why this is so painful. Pay transparency. Everybody wants fair and equitable compensation. Everybody wants career growth. People want to feel safe in their work environment. But when you call it a DEI program, it gets lost. It gets muddied. And so there's this reframing of DEI or BI so that it's more organic in the organization because policies, they run its course. Initiatives certainly run their course. And so we just have to think about it differently. And that's
yeah.
where I think leaders make a real impact here.
I completely agree. And whether we're talking about DEI focused stuff or just, other general elements of employee experience, the window dressing approach doesn't work, right? So certainly in the wake of the George Floyd murder, there's been an ongoing like political tension around all of this for a long time. Like that's not anything new. It's just been ramped up more. And in part, I think it was a backlash towards kind of this feeling like the pendulum swung too far one direction and people were feeling uncomfortable about that. But part of it was people were noticing that a lot of what was coming out after, the George Floyd murder was window dressing. They were
Mhm.
realizing this isn't real. These are, slogans on the wall, a statement on the website, that this is performative. And if it's just performative, then very quickly people start to feel it doesn't engender trust, right? Like
Right.
you want to feel true connection to the meaning, the purpose, the values of the organization, not just a PR spin of what people might be putting out. And that certainly, I think was a part of why we're seeing pendulum swings. Because I agree with you. I think most people, I mean, there are some who probably don't, but most people, don't wake up in the morning thinking about how they want to squash minorities or certain
Exactly.
identities or anything. They just want everyone to be treated fairly. They including themselves. They just want to feel like they belong and that they have opportunities to contribute in meaningful ways. I think pretty much everyone agrees with that. And
Yes.
it's unfortunate that it's become so politicized and labeled in certain ways that it's hard now to have these conversations. But if you get back to the basics of just like common humanity, like we all
Absolutely.
want everyone to be treated fairly, I think, for the most part,
Absolutely.
right? And if we can focus on that and have that values alignment between, our leadership and what they're actually doing, not just saying, and the people that are coming into the organization, I think everyone's going to be way happier. And so getting past the
Yes.
performative stuff, whether it's DEI, whether it's any other aspect of an employee experience, you have to really walk the walk, not just talk the talk. You really got to
Yeah.
do it. And people see the difference. It's so easy to
It's very
notice.
easy. Yeah, it's very
Mhm.
easy to pick out. And I would just say for HR leaders out there, when you think about all of the disciplines that we lead, whether it's talent acquisition slash recruitment, whether it's comp and benefits, whether it's learning and professional development, just go down all of those disciplines and think about how you can organically create spaces for everyone. There's this idea that DEI is just for Black folk, or it's just for Black and brown people, or it's just for the disadvantaged. And we've got to clear that all out. It is about creating opportunities, fair opportunities for everyone, and then let the best person win, right? When I think about talent acquisition, I'm suggesting an organic way to do talent acquisition is to make sure you're doing due diligence to cast a wide enough net
Yep.
so that people have access to that job posting, they have access to interview, etc. And then they have to
And weed out the
perform in that
bias,
interview.
weed out the
Say,
bias that can artificially
absolutely, and
reduce
leave out the
opportunity.
bias.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you go down the line of what sort of benefits are being offered to employees. Is it only targeted to the modern family, the mom, the dad, the dog, right, and the children and the white picket fence? Or is it same-sex couples? Think about your programming and don't get so rigid that it's a policy or a program or this or that. Just think about treating all aspects of your workforce fairly and
Yeah.
equitably and letting them show up as their authentic selves in a safe space is
Yes.
really
And
what it's about.
a safe space, literally physically safe space, but a psychologically
Physically,
safe space.
psychologically, absolutely.
Yeah, emotionally. And just an example of how things have shifted. So again, I'm a straight cisgender white guy. I know I have lots of layers of privilege. But you've articulated like there's lots of different forms of diversity. And there's socioeconomic diversity, there's cultural background diversity, there's mindset and cognitive diversity, there's all sorts of different things. And I happen to come from, very low socioeconomic background. So I have like lots of layers of privilege in other ways. But that's one, where I do have that. And so I have life experiences that are different than some people, just because of that background. And so that's something I bring with me. I bring that with me to my conversations. And everyone has that, everyone has different forms of diversity that they bring with them to the table. And so we can see that, we can value that and let everyone know that they're safe to bring that with them and to have that inform their leadership, their decision making, how they work together in a team, all of those things, and it becomes really valuable. Well, if it's leveraged, it can be very valuable to the
It's
organization.
leveraged, yes, if it's
Yeah.
leveraged. And those are, I think, the diverse perspectives that really help organizations thrive, right? There's definitely a benefit to bringing diversity into an organization, but we have to remove this idea that somehow diversity means quotas. And that's not what we're talking about here.
No, no. Well, and,
Yeah.
and an example of something that has improved just in the last decade quite a bit, and that is around maternity or paternity leave, right? And there's still room
Yes.
for this to improve. But when
Yes.
I first started, I have 6 children.
Oh, wow.
You were talking earlier about like during COVID and having the kids at the table. Like, oh
Yes.
my gosh, my wife and I both working from home with 6 kids all at the kitchen table, all of us trying to do schoolwork and work and trying to do all that. It was
Exactly.
but I for none of the children, my youngest is 12, and so a paternity leave policy did not exist for any when any of my children were born.
Wow.
My wife had maternity leave, but there wasn't any paternity leave. And gratefully, that has changed. Like now, the organization offers the opportunity for any parent or caregiver to take that leave, which is such a huge improvement. I wish it would have been around
Absolutely.
when I was having kids too, but at least it's around now. And I think it's a good example of like a relatively small tweak to an existing policy to just allow it to apply to not just the moms, but also to the dads
Absolutely.
or
But
any
that's a
caregiver.
benefit of DEI, though.
Hmm.
That is a direct reflection of DEI that people don't recognize because they think it's just black or white. It's hiring enough black and brown people. But when we think about employee experiences, it includes everyone. Everyone benefits.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's changing that perspective on what it means to work in an organization that values DEI or abide. It's making
Yeah.
those opportunities available for all employees, including a white male, cisgender, straight,
Yeah.
all of that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And literally everyone benefits. And everyone can see, if you communicate well, everyone can see how they benefit. And I think that's an area where perhaps we've fallen short as well, as we just don't communicate it as clearly or as well as we could or should. And I want to highlight too, when we're talking about employee experience, we're talking about the entire life cycle
Yes,
from recruitment all the way through exit. And hopefully they come and they come into the organization, they feel valued, they have an opportunity to contribute, they stick around for a while. But the whole life cycle of that individual matters. And sometimes I think we just really forget that. And we'll even talk about employee experience, we'll even really prioritize it, but then we'll have a really crummy recruitment and hiring and onboarding process, that
yes,
really turns off a lot of people. And that's part of the employee experience, the applicant experience, and
absolutely.
and so, we talk about customer experience all the time, right? One of the reasons why employee experience has become so important is a realization that especially in certain high-tech fields, and types of jobs and such, that we just have pervasive talent gaps and labor shortages, and it's a hyper competitive labor market. I mean, in certain types of industries and certain types of jobs, it's insane. Like the types of offers that people are getting. You'll have someone with a strong technical background who might have 5 or 6 offers at any given point in time,
Yes,
with insane salary offers and bonuses and sign-on bonuses and such. And so, like, how do you deal with that in an environment where you're trying to also just run your business? And it comes back to the holistic employee experience, the whole life cycle. Treat people well, let people know that you are an employer of choice, that you are a place where everyone wants to work, where they want to come and they want to stay because they have opportunity, because they can grow, because their values align, and because they feel that they truly belong. Like that is the environment that we want to create. And we have to get
that's
past
exactly
the
right.
window dressing. We have to get past the just the empty words, and we have to actually do it. And when we see policies, procedures that are out of alignment with that goal, then we have to make adjustments, right? So that they
Yeah,
are.
so that's one of the reasons why we changed our name away from human resources. And I went through a process in 2022 to sell, if you will, changing our name from human resources to the Office of Employee Experience and Engagement. And in large part, that had to do with coming through and out of the pandemic. But what it highlighted for us is that we needed to be more people-centered.
Hmm.
We needed to be people-centric in order to impact the experiences that our employees, our faculty and staff were having. And so when you think about that, our little slogan is, we care about employee experiences from hire to retirement and everything in between because that's what matters. That's what helps people be productive, thrive, engage, participate. And those are all deeply rooted in our organizational culture. We were just talking about DEI or abide. Those have to be foundational to your organizational culture. It's almost like the sturdy legs
Hmm.
of the culture, of the environment. Because if that's shaky, has cracks, you're not going to have people running toward strategy. I'm a huge fan of culture eats strategy for breakfast. I always say pick a meal, right? Doesn't matter which meal. Your culture is always going to eat up your strategy when people don't feel seen or heard, when they don't feel like they have a voice at the table, when they don't have opportunities for growth, when they don't see transparency. Those things create a disgruntled or unhappy employee, and they're not going to be running to that finish line to get to that wonderful strategic plan that was just created. And so when you strengthen your organizational culture that's rooted in abide, you have a much better chance of getting those strategies done.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, this has just been a fantastic conversation. I know at the time I need to let you go and get on with your busy day, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us a final word for today.
All right, final word. Oh, I like that. I'm going to leave that for last. But to contact me, you can reach me at my employer, lisa.sanchez at artcenter.edu. Part of what I do, I'm an author. I wrote a book called Looking for Love in a Garbage Can, A Journey of Healing, How I Survived an Alcoholic Environment. So while the title of the book is catchy, if you will, there's a deep story about a wounded girl who would show up at work because she came from a dysfunctional work, home environment, and how I showed up at work. And that's why it changed who I am as an HR leader, because I know that there's another Lisa Sanchez out there who just dealt with a rampage, a
Mm.
drunken rampage from their father or their partner or their spouse, right? And so looking for love in a garbage can is how I dug my way out of that in order to be who I am today. So it's a self-improvement, self-help book. Looking for Love in a Garbage Can is available on Amazon.com. Last words of the day is recognize that while Abide or DEI is being attacked, if you will, today, you can reframe that to be more value focused rather than a program and initiative. But last and final word, be kind. Choose to be kind.
Choose to be kind. I love it. Lisa, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Lisa can do for you, check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.